Do you have ADHD? I don't know, but our guest today, she definitely does. No, I'm not bashing her. I'm not freaking making fun of her. She says it herself. It's the name of her freaking podcast. Kristen Carter is the host of the I Have ADHD podcast, and she's here with us today to tell us all about attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Oh my God, this was so much fun. I learned a lot, I laughed a lot, and I hope you do too. Here we are. Here it comes. Here she is, my new hyperactive, distracted friend, Kristen Carter. So, first of all, not everyone listening has ADHD, or maybe they do. Who knows? So I kind of first want for you to give us a sort of idea of what is it like to have ADHD? What is the sort of subjective experience? What is the world that you inhabit and the perception, because if we did an episode on like alcohol, it's like, okay, people can understand that, or episode on like a lot of things. But ADHD is one of these, we kind of know what it is from the outside. Oh, that kid has ADHD. But from the inside, I don't know if we've really got that perception yet. So it might be hard to say, but yeah.
That's a really good question. I definitely don't want to speak for every single ADHD human, but I will say from my perspective, having ADHD is a lot of chaos and overwhelm on the inside. So a lot of your brain kind of spinning, a lot of feeling overwhelmed by all of the things coming at you throughout the day, a lot of trouble making decisions, a lot of being pulled in the direction of things, and then later realizing, oh, shoot, that wasn't the thing that I was supposed to be spending my time on. A lot of big emotions, which is something that we don't talk about very much, but emotional dysregulation is a huge piece, a huge component of having ADHD. And as an adult, we know how to pretend that we're fine on the outside, but on the inside, there's a lot of big emotions. Frustration is a big part of the experience, just feeling like you're a hot mess, or you're always running behind, or like things like you're always just having to put out fires everywhere. I would say that in general, that's what most people describe as like their experience. And for sure, prior to being medicated and lots of coaching and therapy and all of those things, I feel like I'm farther along in my healing journey, but I can still definitely experience that from time to time as well.
Maybe I'm weird, but that doesn't sound like a totally terrible existence, actually, having more emotion and being more in tuned into all the different things in your environment, and maybe going in weird directions. It seems like there might be, I know there's a lot of downsides to ADHD, and we'll go there, but I think it's sort of a superpower too. Okay, maybe not. You could say no, I'm wrong. But if there were certain superpowers of ADHD, things maybe you miss when you're perfectly medicated and you're functioning and everything's great, but you kind of, I miss this part of me. Is there anything like that?
No way.
No, nothing?
I mean, there's no way that I miss the unmedicated part of me. No way. But I will say that if you are privileged enough to have job security, if you're privileged enough to have access to healthcare, if you're privileged enough to have time and space and not always be like racing against the clock, sure, it can be great to have a lot of creativity. It can be great to be really sensitive to the things around you. If you're surrounded by supportive people who can handle your big emotions, then that can be fine as well. But that's speaking from a place of privilege, if that makes sense. It's not the norm. I mean, most people with ADHD, the point of it, like we all struggle with these things from time to time, right? Like this is just a human experience that we all struggle with these things from time to time. But with someone who has ADHD, we're struggling to a level that's debilitating. So we're struggling to a level that it's impacting our work. It's impacting our home life. It's impacting our relationships in a negative way. And that's shown in the research. I mean, there's so many more people with ADHD who lose their jobs, who get divorced, who get into car accidents, and who are sitting in jail cells right now. So like those things, like to be at a diagnostic level, it is impairing you. Are there aspects of it? You know, if people are functioning like really cognitively at a super high level, like somebody like Simon Sinek just came out and was like, well, I have ADHD and I think it's a superpower. And it's like, well, yeah, Simon, you're brilliant, you're white, you're male, and you're rich. Like, of course you can call it a superpower. Yeah. Right. But like for the average human, it's definitely debilitating. We can find good things in it. Of course, we can do that with anything. But it's so interesting how we want to look at ADHD and find the good. Like nobody says that about depression. Like, well, I mean, yeah, I know you have depression, but there are good things about it, right? I know you have anxiety disorder, but there's good things about that, right? So I don't love that perspective, but I do think that every human has superpowers. That's amazing. Like you have superpowers, I have superpowers, but I'm not going to give ADHD credit for my superpowers. Like those are in spite of ADHD, not because of it.
Well, it's just like what I like about, what I do like about people with ADHD is I like their energy, I like their creativity, and yeah, that's me like being with them. And I like feeling energy. I like being creative, but I also want to have a job and have a relationship and not be on homeless or in the streets or, in jail or something. So I get you. I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah, totally. And it is, I mean, we bring a lot to the table and the energy and the creativity, it can be really fun. But what's difficult as someone with ADHD is I don't just get to turn that off and turn it back on. I don't get to light switch that on and off at convenient times of my life. Yeah. Right. So like at a party, sure, I am a good time. Mm-hmm. But like as a 12-year-old girl in school who is getting in trouble so much more than my peers, that's not really fun. Yeah. Right. And so, but yeah, I mean, I think the human experience for all of us is just so deep and we get to see the good in everything and the good in other people. And I think that like, I like that you're pointing that out. I think that's amazing.
Yeah. I guess it seems like it's sort of like, what is the goal? And part of all of our goals is to be a functional human being in this society. Yeah. Maybe if this was like 8,000 years ago or something, and we lived in some weird little tribe and you were a hunter and it's like, I don't know, whatever, just rowing your boat or something, catching fish. Yeah, maybe it was fine. But we don't live in that world anymore. Yeah. So, but yeah, if you have the privilege or whatever, yeah, maybe you can rock out on your ADHD. Yeah. But
exactly.
Thanks for pointing that out, because I was like, oh, I don't know, it looks kind of good, and I'm not sure. Maybe I have it too. But when you mentioned you can't turn it off, that's really a dead killer, because you might go into a job interview, you're at work, or any time in like any time in your life where it can just like destroy things. So that's the deal breaker, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, exactly, because it can seem like a really good time, and we are a good time, but it's not always great to be a good time, like at a funeral, or like saying inappropriate things, adding all of the things to your Amazon cart because you're a good time and spending money that you don't have. Like those kinds of things are like, oh, that's when it gets really, really hard.
So after you started, it's like I listened to one of your interviews, and I guess your dad kind of seemed to, I can't diagnose the whole family or something in one big swoop or over the course of years. And you're like, you were 17 or 18 and you're like, oh, I guess I have ADHD. And you did. But what changed once you did get medicated?
Oh, that's a great question. So, my dad kind of nagged me once he got diagnosed and was like, I think you have ADHD. And finally, after a couple years of those kinds of interactions, I went and got diagnosed and immediately went on a stimulant medication. And I will say that a lot changed for me, because at the time I was double majoring in college. I was drowning. I was getting A's and F's, like not much in between, right? Like I was doing great in the classes that I loved and I was failing the classes that I didn't. My social life was a mess. My house was a mess. My car was a mess. Like everything was just a hot mess. And what the stimulant medication did for me personally is it kind of turned the volume down on all the noise so that I could just think clearly. And when I started taking it, I literally was like, I cannot believe that this is how typical people function on a day-to-day basis.
Easier.
Like no fair. Yeah. Like I could hear myself think. I could like time felt like it was going a little slower. I felt like I could make decisions thoughtfully. It was the first time in my life that I felt as though I was actually in charge. And that felt real good. My grades went on the fridge and it was my own fridge. It was my college apartment and I put those grades on the fridge. I was like, look at these grades like this, to have consistency across the board, just grade wise was like the first time in my life that had happened. It just felt like everything kind of slowed down and got more clear. But I will say that I still didn't know anything about ADHD, right? And pills don't teach skills. Which is a cute little saying,
Cute.
But it's true. Yeah, as far as count. Pills don't teach skills. So it did help. But as I grew into adulthood, there was still a plateau of like, okay, now I'm functioning at a better level, but now I'm plateauing. So I didn't understand what it meant to have ADHD. And I didn't understand that everything I hated about myself was pretty much connected to ADHD. So the fact that I forgot things, the fact that I was terrible with time management, the fact that I was emotionally explosive, like those are all pretty well-known symptoms now. Thank you, Instagram. Thank you, TikTok. Like we all see those videos now, but this was like the early 2000s. So this was a very different time. I know.
All the chaos kind of dissipated and you like just had your world back. Because what if I've read like a bunch of these ADHD books, and it's one of the topics I'm most obsessed with because I think it's so close to me. I don't know if I have it or I have something else, but I'm very interested in it. From what I understand, is the sensory world around us, normal people and whatever, non-ADHD people.
I'm fine with it.
Yeah.
I'm fine with it. Yeah.
I'm cutting this interview off right now.
I'll allow it.
Drink my giant smoothie. No, but
that's amazing.
But normally people can kind of control their attention, what they're focusing on, what they're not focusing on. But we're living in this world where it's all these noises and random things popping around. And correct me if I'm wrong. A lot of people with ADHD, they're highly sensitive to every little change in the environment. They're basically being moved around by the environment. And that's good because maybe in one way, because they get to, I guess they get to have new experiences and see things they wouldn't have otherwise seen, but they probably got priorities. They probably don't want to be staring at that little ladybug that's buzzing in the corner over there, you know?
Exactly. That's exactly it. And the name ADHD, it sounds for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It is a terrible name because it's not a deficit of attention. It's an inability to regulate our attention. And so I've just as much attention as you do, but I struggle to regulate where I put my attention. And so if something is happening, if the guy's mowing the lawn out there, or if there is like a weird noise, or if my shirt feels scratchy and annoying, my attention goes to those things. And I struggle so much to regulate and to focus on what is most important in front of me, unless I am super interested in it. Right. And so, and we can talk about that, like the flip side of it, where when I am obsessed with something, I have tunnel vision, we call it hyperfocus, and I am all in, which can seem like a great thing, but imagine being so focused on, let's say, writing a book or starting a new business that your house is literally falling apart. because you can't regulate your attention to say, okay, I've worked on this project for 8 hours and now I need to go home and I need to cook food and I need to do dishes. I need to make sure I have clean laundry. I need to make sure that my house is not a disaster. And so even the hyper focus part, which some people are trying to say is a superpower, I'm like, it's not a superpower if everything else in your life is falling apart, because I've been there.
Yeah.
I've been there where I have such tunnel vision. I forget I have kids. I forget I have a husband. I forget that like dinner is a thing. And I'm so focused on what I'm doing that everything else is falling apart. My kid's not getting picked up from school. My husband's like, what's the plan here? And that's debilitating. That's not a good thing. And so regulating that attention, it comes back to the self-regulation. How do I regulate that? How do I make sure that like I'm spending the appropriate amount of time on something? And like, it's great to have hyper focus if you're not letting everything else in your life fall apart.
Yeah, 'cause I think people see that hyper focus, like these people in some job where they need to focus, or school. They start taking these ADHD drugs to get the hyper focus. I'm like, but also another side of that, it seems, is even when you're in the hyper focus, the environment must matter crucially, where you can't focus unless you're in the exactly right environment. So how does environment play a role in this, and what can people with ADHD do to sort of do with their space, with their environment to help themselves? Of course, maybe the medication is going to be the best, but what can they do with the space, the environment?
Yeah. So with the space, for me personally, and I think it's the kind of thing that you have to be creative and kind of play with and see what works for you. So what works best for me is like having noise canceling headphones or white noise in my AirPods so that I'm not hearing anything else. I can't have music because music is interesting to me. And some people can work with music, but for me personally, music is very interesting. So it pulls my focus away. So I have white noise going on all the time. The temperature has to be right. I need to make sure, usually like my space is tidy-ish so that there's not like piles and distracting visual stimulus. I really like to see nature. I'm pointing out the window as if you can see. I really like to see nature, but I'm here in my office at work and I'm looking out at a parking lot. And so there's a lot of activity out in the parking lot. So if I need to focus, I'm closing the blinds and making sure that I'm not like seeing stuff out there. And then I like to be cozy. I really like to be comfortable. I'm going to be wearing comfortable clothes. I have blankets right over there just in case. Like I think that comfort is really important. Yeah, I think the environment really does matter. And it can be a big distraction if we don't kind of take 5-10 minutes to kind of set it up for us.
But also you mentioned time. So we talk about space now. There's also this time aspect. And with time, you can either get sucked into this weird vortex and like wake up 2 days later and maybe you wrote some great poem or something, or you cranked out 20 episodes. I don't know. But
right.
Your house is burned down. What can we, you've lost your job and everything. What are some like time kind of management tips? Because I think if you just go like, okay, I'm going to just mentally say, okay, I'm just going to do this, I'm going to do that. You're probably just going to get sucked into something or get distracted somewhere. So you have to sort of almost like plan ahead. It seems like, what are some of the time tricks?
So for time tricks, I would say that Jon Acuff is an author that I really like, and he wrote the book Finish, and I highly recommend that book.
Did you finish it?
And I did finish it. Thank you so much for asking. I know. And he says that time doesn't exist unless you can see it. I think he's a closeted ADHDer, but I'm not going to out him, so whatever. He says time doesn't exist unless you can see it. And I totally agree. And so making time visible is so important for us ADHDers. I like to just use a simple Google Calendar and block off my time, but I even block off like this 30 minutes, you're going to write those 2 emails. This 30 minutes, you're going to, eat your lunch. This 30 minutes, like I block off all of my time so I know what to do next and I can see moving from one thing to the next. And also there's this thing you can go on Amazon and look at timers. It's a clock where you can literally see the passage of time It's fantastic. So those are great. Alarms are our friends. Reminders are our friends. I'm constantly using Siri, like, Siri, remind me to pick up the kids at 4:30 p.m. She reminds me of all of the things all of the time because, again, I'm very out of sight, out of mind. I struggle to remember that I have kids and I have 3 of them. That's a problem. So I need her to remind me, like, don't forget, you have children. They need to be picked up. Okay, Siri, thank you. So just having those interruptions, those alarms to kind of, oh, Siri's like, yes, do you need me? Sorry. Having those interruptions and alarms to kind of trigger you to do the next thing is really important.
Yeah, and you mentioned you got a family too, and you've got what, four kids or something? Three
kids, 3 boys.
Yeah, well, maybe there's 4. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm kidding. Oh no, I'm kidding.
No, we're good.
Yeah, that's what you get for outing John Acuff.
I know. I'm so sorry, John.
I'm gonna edit it into I'm outing John Acuff. I'm not gonna. Yeah, relationships. What do there are a lot of people, especially in North America, but really all over the world, but especially there, who have ADHD. So the likelihood of someone getting into a relationship with someone with ADHD, whether they know it or not, is a decent chance. So what are some sort of how to have a relationship with someone with ADHD, or if you have ADHD, some things you can kind of do to, I don't know, get along, or maybe. Like ADHD person plus ADHD, how does that work? Or ADHD, just talk about relationships and ADHD.
That was like 15 questions. You know that, right?
Yeah, no, that's because I have ADHD.
I mean, I don't want to out you or anything, but that was a lot of questions.
Okay. Basically, relationships and ADHD, just take it wherever you want.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So this is a very important topic. And this is one of the main courses that I teach in my coaching program because relationships are so difficult for people with ADHD. They're so hard. And we are highly susceptible to being in really toxic relationships, honestly. We're highly susceptible because if you think about it, people with ADHD, and there's research to show this, have been rejected by their peers 50-ish% more than their peers. So we experience a lot more rejection, is what I'm saying, than the average human because we show up weird and we show up quirky and we don't do things in a linear fashion, right? And so there's a lot of rejection from peers, from teachers, from parents. And because of that, we develop what's called rejection sensitivity, which means anything now that I perceive as a rejection is going to make me go kind of ballistic on the inside. So now when I take rejection sensitivity into my relationships and I'm with someone who thinks I'm great, but they maybe say like, it's kind of annoying that you were late, which is fair. My body goes crazy because of all, like, this is, remember, built on a pile of rejections, right? And so I perceive that as a rejection and I can be really sensitive to stuff like that. I can be really reactive. It can really be explosive sometimes in relationships. And so, I mean, that is just one of many issues that we kind of bring to the table. And when you're dealing with ADHD plus ADHD in relationship and all of the rejection sensitivity involved in that, that's really tough. So I think what I always tell people with relationships is it is the person with ADHD's responsibility to understand their diagnosis and be treated for it, however they choose to be treated. And there's many ways that you can choose to be treated, but to understand what you're dealing with and to be treated for it, and then accept who you are. And that's so hard. I mean, that's the work of like the human experience, is to just accept who you are. If I can accept who I am, then I can show up with you and not be a weirdo.
Wow, you answered all 50 of my questions. On the 49,
it's almost
you're
like
in the middle
I do
of answer
this
number
for
50, and now I interrupted you. You're almost there.
Okay, so that's the thing, is that if I can accept myself and I can accept my ADHD, I can understand how it relates to every aspect of my life. I can understand the difference between my personality and an ADHD symptom. And I can say to you, like, hey, I am so sorry I was late. It's not okay, but here's what happened. I totally lost track of time and I'm sorry for the inconvenience. That's really different from me showing up and being like, don't yell at me. I'm so sorry. Please don't reject me. Ugh. And being like super weird or getting really defensive. Why are you so mad at me? What's the big deal? Right. And so if I can just accept myself and know that like, yeah, time management's a whole thing. There's a really good reason why it's called ADHD. I'm going to do my best, but I'm not going to do it perfectly. And then I can show up with you and I can say, I'm so sorry. I know this was an inconvenience. That's just one example of how accepting yourself, understanding your diagnosis, and then teaching other people about it. So I can say, I really struggled with this. I'm so sorry. Now, if you are we cursing on this podcast or are we not cursing on this podcast?
I don't really care. It's going to happen eventually.
Okay. I'm just going to say, if you're mean to me about it, let's just say that. If you're a jerk about it, if you're like, that's unacceptable, we can't be friends. Well, okay, then now we know, right? Because I'm always going to struggle with time management. That's a big part of who I am. And so now we can't be friends and that's okay. But just to be clear, Michael, we can be friends.
Oh, we can be friends? Okay. I thought this was like only like a 1 hour thing and a 1 hour friend. Yeah.
for the next 31 minutes.
And my first, like, even though like my first question I asked you was like one of your hot buttons, like, oh, what's the good points about ADHD? I love it. I'm Superman.
You received it so kindly though. And so that means that you're a safe person. You're in.
No, these podcasting is also kind of a thing that must you have ADHD and you've been doing this podcast for not this one, but unless you take over my podcast, don't do that.
I have no interest in doing that.
You don't want a small little
I can
podcast
barely handle
like
the one
mine.
I have.
But you've been doing yours for like 5 years or maybe longer.
4 years, yeah.
Yeah, and you're pretty consistent with it. So how did podcasting maybe help with your ADHD or teach you new things about yourself?
I would say that what podcasting has done for me is kind of force me to research. It's forced me to learn a ton about ADHD. I definitely don't want to be spreading misinformation. So it's really forced me to check my sources, make sure that I am like citing everything properly. So it's taught me not to be flippant about what I say, which is really, really good. Because I have this kind of additional disorder of feeling confident about things that I know nothing about. It's a problem.
The way you paused there, I was like, oh no, what is it?
It's something really bad. No, I'm the kind of person that I'm like, I could do that. That's not a big deal. I can talk about this with authority. And what podcasting and having a large audience has done is made me really check myself and be like, hello, we need to make sure that we are saying correct things. We need to make sure that we are citing our sources. We need to make sure that we are very meticulous. Somebody with ADHD really struggles with being meticulous, usually in general, right? Because we like the big picture. I like the big picture. I like the creativity. I like the messy. But being meticulous about it can be really hard. And so podcasting has really helped me to be more meticulous in that way.
And yeah, we talked about, of course, the medication. That's probably the number one tool people with ADHD can use. But I'm a big fan of some of these like free kind of like natural ones too, like eye movements and breathing and exercise or whatever. Like, what are some of those like, those pure inbuilt tools that we can use?
Yeah, that's such a good question. It goes back to ADHD being a disorder of dysregulation, an inability to regulate. So we struggle to regulate our emotions. We struggle to regulate our attention. We struggle to regulate our behavior. And so anything that's going to help an individual regulate themselves is going to help with ADHD symptoms. So anything that teaches you how to feel and process your emotions, anything that helps you to get your energy out so that you feel more calm and can regulate your behavior, anything that helps you to regulate your attention. So things like, here are some little hot tips. Things like journaling.
Wait, let me get my pen.
Things like,
can you say that? Can you say that again?
Get your pen out. Journaling is amazing. And nobody with ADHD wants to journal. I promise you, none of us want to do it. But it is an amazing tool to slow your thoughts down. I call it brain dumping. We just dump all of the clutter out of your brain onto paper and then throw it away. We don't need to keep it because, I mean, believe me, it's trash. But just get it out and slow it down. And then maybe look at it and be like, what's going on up there? So journaling is amazing. Anything with exercise, walking, running. I like to hike. I am like the typical white suburban mom. I have my little hand weights. I have my little fanny pack, and I go on legit hikes. And it is so helpful to me to be out in nature. Anything regarding nature is so regulating to the nervous system. Learning how to regulate your emotions. So that might look like somatic experiencing. That might look like going to therapy and learning with a therapist. That might look like having a really great trauma-informed coach who's going to teach you how to regulate your emotions. Massages can be really helpful. So I'm sure I'm missing a ton of stuff, like making sure you're eating is great. But these are all things, I have to say, these are all things that are really hard to do when you struggle with executive function. These are all things this is why treating ADHD naturally, you have to be a pretty high functioning ADHDer in order to treat it naturally. Because if you are a lower functioning, and it's on a spectrum, if you're on the lower end of the spectrum, you're not going to be able to sit down and journal. That's not going to be a thing. You're not going to be able to get your time set aside to go on a hike. You're not going to be able to call all of the different therapists you need to call to make an appointment. That's why it can be really hard, because if people on the internet are like, just eat healthy and exercise, it's okay, but eating healthy takes a lot of work. I almost swore again.
I don't care.
Eating healthy.
There have been a couple people.
I'm not going to do it.
Namely my brother.
I'm not going to do it.
Jason, you're grounded for swearing on Michael's podcast.
Listen, Jason, we are judging you. We are all judging you. All of the work that goes into eating healthy, you have to think about what you're going to eat. You have to make a list. You have to grocery shop, whether online or in the store. You have to put all the food away. You have to prep the food. You have to make a plan. You have to make a menu. I mean, there's 700 steps that go into making a healthy meal. So it's not just that easy. I don't want to do any of that. I'm telling you, I'm not doing any of it. And so eating healthy is actually way too hard for me. And so that's why being treated medically can often be the first step and a catalyst to being able to do all of these natural ways as well.
Okay. And this is a hard one. Maybe it's just genetic. What are some of the ideas about what even causes ADHD in the first place? It seems like there is a pretty good grounds for the fact that it's definitely at least partially genetic. But I don't know, go into that. What are the causes, given what you know?
It's such a great question. And I wish we had better answers. I really do. There's just not enough research. And so, yes, it is very hereditary. Okay. It is heritable. Dr. Russell Barkley likes to say that it is as inheritable as height. Okay. So your dad's tall, you're probably going to be tall. Your dad has ADHD, you're probably going to have ADHD. But what is also inheritable...
Thanks, Dad.
I know. So thanks so much for that.
Dad.
Whatever, Dad. What is also inheritable is generational trauma. And what's so interesting about trauma, we're learning so much more about it, is that the symptoms of someone who's had trauma in their childhood are exactly the same as the symptoms of people with ADHD. So poor working memory, poor self-regulation, poor decision-making, poor self-control, impulsivity, all of that. And so now there's this big question of, is it trauma? Is it genetic? Is it nature or nurture, essentially, right? And my guess is it's probably both. My guess is, I mean, they have found like a genetic component to it, but not conclusive enough to say like, here is the one gene that causes ADHD, right? And as I have learned more and more about trauma and read books like The Body Keeps the Score and What Happened to You, and just taking trauma courses, it's pretty clear that many of us have also had a lot of trauma in our lives. And so is that ADHD? Was it caused by genetics or was it caused by generational trauma? I don't really know. It's a really fascinating conversation. What I will say is I serve a very large group of ADHDers in my coaching program, and many, I would say the majority, identify trauma in their life. Not big, necessarily acute, like the one big thing that happened, but things like emotional neglect, things like a lot of rejection, things like not having a safe place for your emotions to be validated and heard, things like feeling insecure and not having the safety at home. Those kinds of things can be considered trauma as well.
Wow. Actually, thanks for mentioning that point, because that was actually one of my other questions. Is like, okay, seems like trauma, especially like complex PTSD and some of that stuff, is eerily similar. And it might also explain why there is a sort of big uptick in ADHD in the United States, because like sort of family and communities are breaking down and it's becoming less safe. People are basically trauma is increasing.
Yeah. And we're becoming more aware of it, which is beautiful. Like we're becoming more aware that the behavior that our grandparents used with our parents is actually really inappropriate, right? Like for most of it. Like, am I just speaking for myself? I'll just speak for myself. Like, I can see the generational patterns in my own family and see how it was passed down from grandparents to parents to me. I can identify that very, very clearly. And things that were just normal and natural, and like everybody hit their kids. Nobody talked to their kids about emotions. Like, it would have been weird if grandpa talked to dad about emotion. Like, now we look at that and we're like, whoa, that's so inappropriate. And so we're identifying so much more now as trauma than we ever would have 50 years ago. And so that's really, really good. But it also is so hard. It's so hard to see that and to be like, yikes, what have we done in this country? And I know it's not just America or North America. I'm speaking really with that context in mind, but I know that trauma across the board, is so difficult. And then when we look at people in racialized communities, people of color, like people who've grown up, Black, brown, indigenous, Asian in this country, all of the additional trauma that they've faced, my goodness, it's no wonder that we're struggling.
It also kind of explains that incarceration, the high incarceration rates of people with ADHD. Maybe it's ADHD, maybe it's trauma, maybe it's the whole situation. So maybe we can use some of these trauma tools, I don't know, like somatic experiencing and TRE and other things like that that might help with some of these ADHD symptoms as well.
Yep. Yes, 100%. When I talk about trauma, and I have done a lot of research, a lot of courses, I have a trauma-informed coaching certification. I'm all in on the trauma stuff. Like I want to learn more and more and more and be a very trauma-informed coach. And the problem, like with somebody like Gabor Mate, I love him. Love. But one of the things that he says is like, ADHD is caused by trauma, period. Oh. And so what we need is trauma care. And I'm like, yeah, but where are all the trauma-informed therapists out there who are going to serve these millions of people with ADHD? And how are we going to access them? And how are we going to get the executive function necessary to make 700 phone calls and call my insurance and call the provider and schedule the appointment and show up to the appointment? I need a baseline executive functioning in order to do that. And that's why, in my opinion, medication is the first step. And then if we can get to the point where we can make those 700 phone calls and schedule all the appointments and show up to the appointments and actually follow through, right? Like actually follow through on like, okay, you're going to come once a week for an hour and 15 minutes and like, okay, I'm going to follow through on that. Then, and we can get that healing. Maybe we can like go off the medication once that's a thing, right? So like once I'm seeing huge improvements in my ability to regulate my emotions, in my ability to regulate my nervous system, and in my ability to regulate my attention and my behavior, then maybe I see if I can live life without the medication. And that, I think, is a really beautiful approach. So when I talk to my clients, I say, first we got to triage. Because like some people are just not functioning. We're not keeping a job. We're not picking up our kids. We're not making dinner. We just got to get to a baseline functioning. So we got to triage first. And after we triage and we can function, then we can do some deeper healing. Unless you're like a person of privilege and someone is going to make the phone calls for you and you have all of the money in the world to pay and you have people that are supporting you and saying, I'll take you to your appointment or I'll make sure that you do it. That's not the case for most people.
What are some of the other mental health conditions that often get they might overlap with ADHD, or they might be kind of confused? People might get misdiagnosed. What are some of the most common ones that are kind of related and they're confusing? Which one do I got? Maybe, or sometimes the doctors get it wrong, basically too.
Yeah. I was just having a conversation with a doctor who said that they get so little training on ADHD, especially adult ADHD. So when you're going in for a diagnosis, you need to assume that your clinician probably does not know much about ADHD. And so even though we respect the clinician and we're so glad that they're there, love all the clinicians, love you.
Love you.
But also, love you. Bye. But also, you need to go in with a good understanding of what ADHD is. And I always suggest people bring a list of symptoms. You can print one from my website if you want. But I always suggest that you bring in a list of symptoms. You kind of circle the ones that you struggle with. You make notes of how they impact you, because anxiety and depression, especially for women, are going to be the go-to for clinicians. So many women are diagnosed and treated for anxiety and depression. And then later in life, like it's never solved. It's never solved. You're just feeling like there's still something going on. And then later in life are diagnosed with ADHD, and that like clears everything up. So definitely anxiety and depression. There's definite, and they are, we call them comorbid disorders. There are a lot of people with ADHD who also experience anxiety, who also experience depression. So of course they're overlapping, but what's sad is when ADHD is not pulled into the picture, right? So it's like a part of the story, but it's not diagnosed. OCD can overlap a lot with ADHD, and OCD can be really hard to diagnose. And so some people with ADHD also have OCD but are not diagnosed. I have a kiddo who has both, so lucky to have a diagnosis of both OCD and ADHD. But the psychiatrist that we talked to recently said, you know what? I don't think he actually has ADHD. I think that his distractibility is caused by untreated OCD, which is so interesting. So when you have all of those intrusive thoughts and they're not treated properly, of course you're going to be distracted. And of course it's going to show up as like an inability to regulate your attention, when in actuality, if we can get the OCD treated properly, and he has been treated for OCD, but it's now that he's like growing and in puberty, like everything's kind of shifting. If we can get the OCD treated properly, maybe ADHD just disappears, which is so fascinating.
Yeah, because the medications are going to be totally different medications. I guess still going on sort of low
Yeah.
dopamine hypothesis, which I don't know if it's true or not, but anyway, there's definitely a dopamine thing
Mm.
going on, and these medications
Yep.
tend to kind of bring in more dopamine and norepinephrine and all the
Yep.
catecholamines and stuff.
Yep.
And the antidepressants, I guess there are, they could work for ADHD, but it's probably better to use actual ADHD medications.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. So for my story specifically, my son is treated with an SSRI, right, for the OCD. But apparently we just found out not the correct SSRI. So that sucks. So we're doing a med switch and then a non-stimulant medication for ADHD. And so the difference there is that because he struggled with a lot of anxiety, his old psychiatrist was like, let's not put him on a stimulant for ADHD. That's going to increase the anxiety. Let's just do a non-stimulant. And so that wasn't even affecting his dopamine.
I'm a bit confused about the whole dopamine thing, actually, because usually we associate dopamine with like this sort of energy and this motivation and this ready to go out there and do things, which looks like ADHD, basically. I'm like, wait, ADHD people have low dopamine? It looks like they have high dopamine.
Yeah.
But it's like, yeah, can you explain the whole dopamine thing? I have my own little theories, but I'd rather just hear it from you. I could talk to myself all day.
I love that. Yeah, that's such a good question. So, what you're seeing when you look at someone with ADHD and you're like, well, it looks like they've got plenty of dopamine, what you're seeing, I'm guessing, is someone who's gone on a dopamine hunt. Because we're gratification junkies. We're looking for that dopamine. So because I have low dopamine, I'm looking for the places to go get it. And so I'm going to the party and I'm going to like put myself out there. I'm going to talk to all the people. I mean, that's like an extroverted, that's an extroverted ADHDer. So when I go for that dopamine hunt, it looks like me eating all the fun, spicy food, wearing all the fun clothes, decorating my house with all the fun colors. But that's because I'm in search of dopamine and my bland environment or my bland job or my bland relationship ain't cutting it for me. So if I, for example, am in a healthy monogamous relationship and feeling very low dopamine, what's often going to happen, not for me specifically, I would like to say, is we go look elsewhere for dopamine in other relationships, right? So that's, again, maladaptive, not usually what we're wanting. If I can regulate my dopamine, then I can actually feel the dopamine in my healthy monogamous relationship. If I have low dopamine, then I'm going to look for it somewhere else. Does that make sense? And so if I can get that dopamine level regulated, then something like doing the dishes doesn't make me feel like I want to die because I have enough dopamine to get myself through the task of doing the dishes. But if I have zero dopamine, you better believe those dishes are sitting in the sink.
Yeah.
I'm not doing it. So that goes with task initiation. So the low level of dopamine makes it really hard to initiate a task that's super boring, mundane, methodical, seems useless. If something seems dumb or useless, I am not going to do it unless my dopamine levels are regulated to the point where I'm like, okay, fine. I can put on a podcast. I can make this more fun. I can dance with my kids around the kitchen. We can get this done.
That makes total sense because when you're low on dopamine, like say, it doesn't sound like you drink alcohol, but when people drink, they maybe you do, whatever. Probably swear like a slave.
We will never know. We're never going to know.
Swear like a sailor during that time. You're just, beep beep beep. What's in that cup? What's in that cup? No, mine is so big.
Just vodka. That's not a big deal.
Just a little morning vodka. Now I got distracted. Yeah. So when your dopamine's really low, you can't do anything that like you want to do. You want to just like play on your phone and eat candy, and you want to have sex with some stranger, and you're just like totally out of control. You're an animal. Right. So yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Again, it's like this is where clinically we look at it's debilitating. Is this debilitating? Is this affecting my life in a negative way? Right. And so a lot of people with ADHD develop like binge eating disorder because we're going to look for the dopamine in the food, in the crunch, in the taste. We start treating the ADHD, a lot of times binge eating disorder goes by the wayside because my dopamine levels are regulated. I'm not having to look to food to get the dopamine. Same thing with drinking. I mean, there's so much like self-medication happening. When someone is, and this is why like the regulation of ADHD meds is so frustrating to me, because people with ADHD are highly at risk for substance use or misuse, for substance misuse.
Yeah.
But if we are medicated, that goes way down. Right. And so people who have ADHD really need to have access to their medication so that all of those risks can be lowered. But the government makes it really hard to access medication.
Yeah, because like a lot of these people, I'm guessing a lot of those people who ended up in jail too, who had ADHD, people are doing all kinds of crazy drugs and cocaine and drinking and going on shopping binges and having no money and really destroying their lives because they need to feel that like balanced levels in there and they can't get it except for, there's so many easy ways to get it nowadays, right? It's like, oh, you just buy it basically and find it. And there's all kinds of drugs and technology and toys and stuff. So
so many, like gambling addiction, porn addiction, like risky behavior, like stealing or risky stuff at work. Like, oh, I'm just going to like forge these numbers just for the thrill of it because I need the dopamine, right? It's like, if we can just help people to be regulated, then a lot of those risks are non-existent.
Yeah. Well, what about people who don't have ADHD, but they still are quite addicted and they can't get out of that dopamine loop? Any ideas for them? Because they shouldn't be popping the Adderalls or none of that.
No, for sure. Therapy.
Yeah.
Go to therapy. Find a really good trauma-informed therapist and just be really honest with them about what you're dealing with. But yeah, non-ADHDers, the normies are not my area of expertise, Michael. I have no idea what to tell you.
Do you know any normies? Am I the most normie person you know?
That would be no.
Oh my God. I'm not normally like this. It was something I ate
so
earlier.
I love it. I
was kind of nervous before coming on here because I don't know, we booked this a couple months ago and like I've been like reading these books and like I don't know, like I like to go in this sort of like inside the brain, like let's talk about the parts of the brain, and I got this feeling like, oh, that's not really your area either. You kind of like to talk about this stuff, so I was like, let's just see where it goes. And yeah, it's going in a fun, wacky way. I'm enjoying it.
Well, I think so too. This has not sucked.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, yeah. I'm glad. You didn't even swear either. You didn't even swear one time. You went through a whole hour without swearing.
I held back. Look at me regulating myself. Yeah. It's almost as if I am medicated and caffeinated and ready to roll.
But you know, there's a rebound effect. So if you're trying to hold it in too long, maybe tomorrow or tonight, you're going to be...
It's coming out at my husband later. You better believe it.
Yeah, he's going to get it double tonight. Okay, great. So, where can I guess people can find your podcast? I have ADHD. It's probably the biggest ADHD podcast, or one of them. I can't say that. I'm going to piss somebody off. Oh, is that a bad word? Oh no. Piss. Your podcast, I have ADHD, right? And your is your website the same? I have ADHD.com.
You got it. I have ADHD.
Yeah, coaching thing. I'll let you do your little spiel. Yeah, I'm doing it pretty poorly.
Oh, no, I think you're doing a great job. Yep. So I host the I Have ADHD podcast. It is the highest rated ADHD podcast out there. So that is, that's something.
Oh, that's amazing.
Love it so much. So come hang out with me over there. And my website is ihaveadhd.com if you want to learn more about me or the services that I offer. And I like to hang out on Instagram. I'm too old for TikTok, but I'm on Instagram at I Have ADHD podcast.
Nice. And yeah, you've got like a coaching program. You got like all kinds of cool stuff. Have you written a book?
Oh
no, I'm sorry. Oh no.
No, it's just that like this week, you are the fourth person this week to mention writing a book. And I really thought that I could put it off longer, but I'm not sure that I can. So yeah, I would love to write a book. I'm just scared. I don't, scary thing. It's going to be a lot of work.
Well then, do you have any recommended, I know there's a billion ADHD books out there, any books your top resources? Cause I'm sure you've dug through the whole gamut.
For sure. Oh my gosh, yes. Okay, so it kind of depends on where you are in your ADHD journey. I love Dr. Russell Barkley's book, Taking Charge of Adult ADHD. If you are just at the very beginning, just learning about it, like what is ADHD? How do I get a diagnosis? The first half of his book, Taking Charge of Adult ADHD, is fantastic. It is so informative. It's written for the ADHD brain. It's all of the basic facts, like boom, right there for you. The second half, it's fine. I give you permission not to finish it, ADHDer. Just read the first half and then leave the second. I also love Tamra Rozier's book, Your Brain's Not Broken. I think that's a really great book. I just interviewed her for my podcast. And she's great. And it is kind of like the next step, like a more in-depth level. And what else? I'm looking at my shelf over here. I like Ari Tuckman. He's written a couple books. More Attention, Less Deficit. Really like that book. And if you are a total nerd and you've read all the books and maybe you are like wanting to go into even deeper, Russell Ramsey's book, Rethinking Adult ADHD, is fantastic. But it's like a textbook, but it's so good.
Dude, and all those, they say ADHD people have memory problems. It seems you don't. You're just spitting off all those names out of your head.
I mean, I've been immersed in this world for a long time, and I'm literally looking at my bookshelf to the left right over here, making sure I get it all right. Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, thanks so much. It was fun hanging out. We'll do it again in 10 years or something.
Love it. Thanks so much for having me. It was so fun.